Hey everybody, my name's Kyle Houchins. I'm a tech and a trainer for McNeil, and I want to talk to you a little bit about V7 Beta and Quad Remesh and how you can use the tools that we have right now to do some pretty effective reverse engineering from scan data or unorganized meshes or anything like that. I started using Rhino a long time ago, and I started doing tech support probably about 6 or 7 years ago. And one of the things that I keep seeing over and over and over again is people asking, how do I take a mesh and turn it into NURBS? How do I take a mesh, turn it into NURBS? And the answer was always, you can, but it's kind of painful and it's not fun and it's pretty hard. Um, and there was actually a white paper somewhere, if you've been with Rhino for a long time, about how to do this. In fact, if you emailed John Brock on tech support years ago and asked for this, he would have given you that paper with instructions on how to do it. And it's pretty daunting. So with V7, there's a new tool called Quad Remesh, and Quad Remesh allows you to take an unorganized mesh like this and create a new mesh from it, which has an organized quad structure. And that doesn't sound like a terribly big deal until you look at the fact that you can take an organized quad structure and turn it into a sub-D, and you can button click a sub-D into a NURBS object, which means that we have kind of unintentionally created a really cool, elegant little reverse engineering workflow here. So I want to talk a little bit about that and show you some of the things that are here. Um, again, this was never designed necessarily to be a retopology or a reverse engineering tool. It just so happens that if you string a bunch of stuff together, you can actually get pretty interesting results. So I want to try and walk through that workflow. The caveat here is, like I said, this wasn't designed as a reverse engineering workflow. So there's stuff in here that if you've done professional reverse engineering, you're going to go, well, what about this and what about that? And I'll say, yeah, I absolutely agree with you. That should be in there, but it's not right now. So settle down. All right. And this is going to develop further because it's something I'm interested in, and it's something that that I'm going to work on behind the scenes here to hopefully make this a little better. So, but what we have right now is actually pretty cool. So I want to talk a little bit about it. So I have this open half of a shoe last, right? And it's unorganized triangles. You can see there's no topology to it. There's no structure to it. You know, it was put together maybe with scan patches or something like that. But it's not super useful because if we turn the points on for this thing, you can see that is a bit of a nightmare, right? So you'd never be able to edit that except maybe with you know, the UDT tools like Bend or Cage Edit or something like that, you may be able to do something with. But trying to go in on an individual level and deal with this would be a nightmare. So if you had a client that said, for instance, you needed to make more room in the toe box, or you needed to push out the, you know, the pinky toe area or something like that, you'd kind of be out of luck because there's really no way to do this. So let's start with the most basic thing, which is just to run Quad Remesh. Excuse me, Quad Remesh. And the settings I'm going to use here, I'm actually going to aim for a much smaller mesh, right? Because the whole idea behind sub-D is less is more. You want to use less quads, less edges, less points, because the less stuff you have, the smoother your model is going to be. And so I'm going to go ahead and run this at 150 quads. And I'm just going to go ahead and run it, and we'll see what we get, right? And right off the bat, you can see that it actually does a really pretty nice job. And if I just take this and run it, let me get the sub-D here. You can see that it does a pretty good job here, right? The location of the quads is fairly arbitrary. Even though it kind of analyzes the topology of what you're doing and tries to match, there's some stuff in here like this area back in here which is a little bit messy, and we'll talk about how to deal with that. The toe box actually looks really good. This is all looks really good. I'm okay with where this star point is, but this is a little messy. So let's see if we can do better. And one of the things I'm going to do is to be in the right viewport to start with, is I'm going to add some guide curves. And I'm going to pick, just draw a curve through this thing. I'm going to go all the way through it. And then I'm going to draw another one kind of through here, like that. And then I'm going to run between those. And I'm going to just add one more curve right in the middle. And it doesn't go all the way through the model, so I'm just going to turn on the point for that. And I'm just going to pull it so that it goes all the way through. Then I'm going to project this onto the mesh. And you can see the result I'm left with are these three guide curves, right? So let's bring the mesh back. And let's run Quad Remesh again. So this is the object we're going to remesh. And this time I'm going to select some guide curves. And I'm just going to, I have a hotkey set up for selecting curves, so I'm just going to use that. And the curve influence, I have a couple of choices here. I have none, approximate, create edge ring, and create edge loop. Now, an edge ring is probably the more appropriate choice. So let's do that and run it and see what we get here. And you can see that it seems like it's straightened that out a little bit. Now, if I change this to edge loop, let's see what happens. It may or may not do anything. All right. It changes the topology a little bit, and we'll have to look at the meshes closely to decide whether it's something that we like or not. And then the last option here is approximate, which just says it's a suggestion of where you think the edge loops should be. And in this case, I don't like that. So I think I'm going to go back to edge ring and let that run. And I think that that is probably going to be okay. Maybe, maybe not. We'll see. And let's take a look at this mesh. And you can see that it made a mess down here. So I don't like that at all, right? I don't like the flow of here is really nice, but it just came apart down here, and I don't like that. So let's get rid of it, bring it back. And let's try and do some guide curves in another direction. Let's go this way. And let's follow more closely to the bottom of this. And then let's use tween. Tween works great for this, by the way. If you haven't used this before, it's a cool tool. All right, so let's use tween. We'll take these three curves. We'll project them onto the mesh. And let's run Quad Remesh again. And let's use these curves. Again, I'm going to use my hotkey for selecting the curves, just because it's easier than trying to pick them out of that mesh. And I'm going to set this as an edge loop, because I want these to create loops. So let's go ahead and run that and see what it looks like. We also, I've got detect hard edges down here, so it's actually going to recognize the edge of this mesh and run that. And see how much nicer this is down here? So that actually was a better result. Now we've still got some yuck up here, which I don't like. So we're going to try and deal with that in actually right now. So let's deal with that right now. So the goal here, I'm going to go to wireframe. I'm going to stick this on a different layer so I can see it. And I'm going to hide that one. And so almost perfect topology here, right? I gotta say, for an automagical tool, that's actually really pretty good. So I'm pretty happy with how that looks. The question is, how do I deal with this area right here and this area right here? And we'll just go ahead and use like our regular sub-D tools for fixing this, right? So I'm gonna let's change this to a sub-D first. So we're gonna say to sub-D, and there is an option to actually have it output a sub-D from the Quad Remesh, but I didn't do that. So I am going to delete the input because I just want to get rid of that. And if we look at the sub-D, you can see already it's really pretty clean. If I go to rendered view and put a material on this, which is always fun. You can see that this is really good already. And I could simply just run two NURBS and have a NURBS object on this, but let's pick at it a bit and do a little better, shall we? So let's go to box mode, which is just by hitting the tab key, and let's fix this stuff up here. And the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to just delete this edge, right? And that seems counterintuitive, but it makes space for us to work here. And then I'm going to pick these points. Actually, I'm going to just do it one at a time. And I'm going to slide this, and that's going up and down, so I'm going to change my direction. I'm going to slide this over a little bit. I'm going to do the same thing here. Slide it. And what I'm doing is I'm just making a little space for this to go. And so now you can see I've got an edge loop here. And that's not going to let me slide. So let's go ahead and fix that. So let's go to sub D. I'm going to use the insert points into a mesh or sub D. I'm going to click on this, and I'm going to just snap here, and I'm just going to continue this loop down and clean that up. Do the same thing here. And that cleans up my topology a little bit. And now I can do things like I can grab this and slide it, and I can just straighten out this stuff a little bit as I want. If I hit the D key, it changes direction. Nice little interface trick there. Because sub-Ds don't have UV directions, the direction is kind of arbitrary. So if it's going in this direction, it doesn't mean if I click the next one, it's going to go in the same direction. So you may have to toggle back and forth on that D key a little bit in order to get what you want. Now, I've got another issue up here, which is, you know, this kind of goes here. So maybe what I want to do is I want this ring to chase down here, which means I'm going to need an edge in the center here. So let's go from here to here, and let's get rid of that one and just make that a quad. And then let's get rid of that one and make it a quad. And let's see what that looks like. It looks a lot nicer. I like how that flow is a lot nicer, right? How nice and clean that is. And we've got a few other options for straightening stuff out. You see how this edge here is a little janky? Let's fix that. If I bring up the smooth tool, if I spell it right, you can see that I've got some sliders here. I've got X, Y, and Z, and then fixed boundaries. That's an important thing because it's not going to mess with the top or the bottom, because I don't want to do that. But if you notice, if I use world C-planar object coordinates, in this case I'm going to use object coordinates, as I drag this, look what I can do. I can kind of just clean that up a little bit, right? And I can decide how much influence that's going to have. I'm just going to straighten that guy out. And maybe what I want to do is slide this point. So I'm going to just hit the D key and go in this direction. And then what I can do is I can smooth that again, because now I've got a different boundary, right? So because the boundaries are fixed. See how nice and clean that starts to get? And then maybe I go in this direction. Same thing, bring up smooth. Let's see how I can just kind of clean those isoparam. I guess they're not isoparams. Clean those lines up a little bit. Edge loops. Maybe slide this one. And I can very quickly kind of come in here and say, figure out what it is I want to do. Now, you'll see that I've got a dent in this thing. Let's put a bigger dent in it, like this. And I want to straighten that out. Now, I might be able to do that with smooth. If I do that, let's see if I can take it out with smooth, and it looks like I can. So that's one way of doing it. The other way of doing it is if I turn on the control points, and these are different than the vertices. If I turn on the control points on this, I can bring up move UVN. Now, this is one of those things that it's kind of like, it's not entirely perfect, but it does work. And the difference is you have to use the control points, not the edit points of the vertices, which are something we'll talk about on another time. But what this allows me to do, if I pick the control vertices, move UVN respects that, which means I can move in the U or the V, right, like this. Or I can also move in the normal, which is super useful, because now I can do all of this procedurally. And I can straighten all this stuff out based on the view and take out those dents Now, again, subds don't have UVs, so that means if I grab one point and drag one slider and then I move to the one next to it, it may not behave the same. So don't get freaked out by that. It's just, you're not losing your mind. That's just the way it works. And I went to art school, so I'm not going to be able to explain to you why that is, but people smarter than me tell me that's the way it is. So I just go, okay, fine. All right, so I'm going to just use the normals, get that straightened out. I can chase all these guys around a little bit, just get them all nice and clean. By the way, there's also scale settings here. So if I set this to 0.1, watch what happens. If I drag this slider a lot, see it barely moves. If I check 100 and I grab that same thing, it moves a lot. So there's a lot of ability to be able to tune this stuff really nicely. One, it's kind of a nice, effective slider, you know. But if you need to get in really into the weeds and do something that's really, really detailed, kick that down and you can end up with something that's really quite nice. So we used project with lines, right? We used Quad Remesh. We used move UVN on control points, right? On control points. It doesn't work on the edit points and it doesn't work on the sub-D vertices. It has to be on the control points of the surface. Okay, so we used smooth, which works fantastic for straightening out even just one point, or you can straighten out an entire edge loop. I keep saying isoparams. That's the wrong thing to say. It's an edge loop or a ring, right? So these are loops. These are rings. Okay. So you can straighten out an entire loop, you can straighten out an entire ring, but and if we're going to use move UVN, we have to turn on the control points. Okay. So once we get to this point, we've got it fairly refined. Then what we can do is simply just say to NURBS. And the sub-D options up here, we're going to pack these, and we're going to use G1. We could do G2 if we wanted, but G1 is fine for what we're doing right here, and we're just going to go ahead and run that. And the result is a beautiful, and it works off the sub-D, by the way. So if you're wondering why the sub-D was faceted and this is smooth, it works off of the limit surface of the sub-D, not the box version of it. All right. So we end up with a beautiful NURBS version of this, and if we go to rendered mode, you can see that it's really, really smooth, really, really clean. This will trim, this will boolean, this will thicken. Anything that you can do with a NURBS model, you can do with this. Now, there's one step that we could go further on this if we wanted to. If we go back to shaded view, you can see that there's a lot of isoparams in this, and if I explode it, you can see that how it packed into fairly big, fairly usable regular surfaces. Now, I can take this, and I'm just going to make a copy of it so you can see what's going on. But I can take this, and I can run fit surf on this, and I can do it at a tolerance, right? And I can lower the point count a little bit. And it looks like it wasn't as dramatic as I was hoping. So let's do it one more time. You can see kind of the result there, right? It's a little bit less. But let's do something a little more. So let's refit the surf again. Sorry, it's called fit surf. Not refit surf, fit surf. And let's change the tolerance to 0.1. Let's bring it down. Now you can see that it really dramatically lowers the point count and makes the surfaces a little bit easier to deal with, right? So if we wanted to do any point editing on the surfaces, we have much fewer to deal with as opposed to if we did in here. Now, we may have to do a little bit of matching to get this stuff to work, but we could also even go in here and rebuild this surface. If we wanted to do something like, and do this as single span, we could actually end up getting this down to the point. Now we've got a fairly large deviation here, so that may or may not be enough, but let's say it was. Okay, we can end up with essentially single span surfaces with super organized points that we could then mess with, right? And if I were to do this on all of them, and if I were to rebuild these all the same, and end up with two single span surfaces, then I could come in here and match surf and have the basis. I'm not going to refine this. I'm going to average them. It doesn't quite have enough points in order to be able to make that match. So let's let's go, actually, let's not preserve the other end. Let's go ahead and refine it. And that would be how we would end up with a cleaner match based out of those. All right. So you've got a lot of options as far as what you want to do and how you want to do it. I personally usually only need to go this far. I usually don't need to go into the weeds and start simplifying surfaces and fitting stuff like that. But I just wanted to show that option as it exists. Now, by doing the rebuild and the matching and all that kind of stuff, I'm going down a rabbit hole of having to try and match up edges and things like that, and that may or may not be you know, something that you want to jump into. But I just wanted to show the workflow for what it was worth. So. So anyway, from where we are from here, this stuff, we can join this all back up. And if we wanted to do something like, if we wanted to thicken this, or we wanted to add, you know, wall thickness to this and print it, we could certainly do that. And just to prove I'm not making this up, we can certainly do anything that we would want to do with a normal NURBS surface, like trimming, anything like that. It works really nicely. All right. So that's kind of a little overview of how you can do this, how you can use the tools that we have right now to do a fairly effective reverse engineering job. I haven't tried it on something that's super complicated that has lots and lots and lots of you know, fillets, like a mechanical object or something like that. I would imagine it would work fine, but you would have to have your quad mesh be a lot higher density. So play with it, let me know what you think, and if you have any suggestions on how to make it better, always hit our forum, which is discourse.mcneil.com. I'm Kyle Houchins. This is V7 Beta. This is using stuff we have for a reverse engineering like workflow. Hope you enjoy it. Give this stuff a shot. Go make great stuff. Thanks.